Hello and welcome to the latest Parkrun Q&A. My name is Glen Turner. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Lead for Parkrun in Australia and New Zealand, and I live opposite Varsity Lakes Parkrun in Queensland. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Tim Coe from Claysbrook Cove Parkrun, which is on the opposite side of the country in Western Australia. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Now, Tim, you're not just a GP. You're also the former chair of the board for the Royal Australian College of GPs. You're the host of the very successful The Good GP podcast, which is rapidly approaching its 100th episode. And perhaps most importantly, personally, you're also rapidly approaching the Parkrun 100 Club yourself. So we're really grateful that you found some time in your incredibly busy schedule to join us from sunny Perth in Western Australia, which shouldn't sound too unusual given Perth is the sunniest city in the world. But if you and I were chatting last week with the remnants of Cyclone Manga ripping through, it was anything but sunny over there. So I just wanted to start, Tim, by asking you what it's like being over in Western Australia at the moment, not just with COVID-19 to deal with, but also that massive storm last week. So can you just paint a picture of where you live and work, what your neighbourhood is like, and what you can and can't do in light of the current restrictions where you are?
Yeah, sure, Glenn. You're right. It's been such interesting times in Perth. We've had a really big storm pass through last week, and it's sort of still cleaning up, so it's still quite cloudy. And that sort of dumped a whole heap of rain and blew trees down. So Perth was looking a bit of a mess for quite a while, but we're back to sort of near normality now, which has been great. Yeah, Perth's an interesting place right at the moment. I mean, in the context of COVID-19, we've done really, really well, which has, been a good experience in lots of ways. And the really exciting thing that's about to happen this weekend is our restrictions are going to change. So I think there's a lot of people that are sort of slowly drifting out, and you certainly start to feel like there's more people out there doing things, and life after 3 months is starting to return to normal. So I think there's a sort of sense of optimism. Western Australia has done pretty well in terms of its results for COVID-19 so far. And, you always sort of, want to be cautious about saying anything because things can change, obviously, with COVID-19 pretty quickly. But so far, we've had very, very little community transmission. And our only cases seem to be coming in from returning travellers and sort of ships of different descriptions. So we've gone from a somewhat worried environment to perhaps a lot more optimistic, and it's really nice to go out and see people out in the streets walking and running and exercising again, which we've all desperately needed.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say, mate, that you're an incredibly passionate parkrunner. So can you just give us a quick overview of how you first got involved with parkrun and why it captured your imagination?
Yeah, so running seems to run through my family for lots of reasons. My father, who's in his 70s, still runs and has run most of his sort of time as career as a GP. I'm a second generation GP, so I watched my dad run, and I started running myself as a sort of school age kid. And my wife's a really sort of committed and passionate runner as well. And where as our kids grew up, at around age 4, my eldest son just started running pretty spontaneously, and so we reached this point where he wanted to start sort of more competitively running, and parkrun was just the perfect vehicle. So at age 9, he sort of set the target of wanting to run parkrun in 25 minutes, which was pretty ambitious, and we just ran together, and it was just it was such a good fun thing to do. Mostly we just made it about the two of us spending time together, and he sort of actually became quite obsessed by his time at parkrun, which was probably good, because it sort of, I think it taught him a lot about setting goals and really wanting to improve, and it was just a really fun thing for us to do. And even today we still run parkrun together as a family. We've got 3 kids, and well, not recently. We stopped on the 14th of March, as you know, but we just love that family time of parkrun and just the process of just doing something together. So that's my passion.
Fantastic. And so you just touched on it then. If we rewind back to before the COVID pandemic, as a GP, what did your, I guess, normal week look like for you professionally?
Yeah, so I'm a 5-day-a-week GP. I work across 3 practices in Perth, 2 in outer Metro Perth, 1 in inner Metro Perth. And I've been a GP for 20 years, so that's been a really, it's a wonderful job because you become, I guess, in a really good way involved in people's lives as as a sort of often a very positive force, and it's that opportunity to sort of walk through challenging times with people, which is the wonderful thing about the general practice profession, that sort of continuous care and involvement. So that was 5 days a week. Beyond that, I sort of have this career in teaching general practice. So I teach sort of trainee GPs or GP registrars. So over the last 10 years, I've trained about 60 GPs, and then I'm also involved in sort of teaching more generally in general practice, which was, as you mentioned, I was involved in the College of GPs, and then I started this sort of podcast for teaching GPs, which was just sort of been another little fun little hobby, basically, that sort of didn't go where I expected it to.
And as a health professional, what was your reaction when COVID was declared a pandemic back in March, and watching those cases and the deaths escalate, firstly overseas and then in Australia? I mean, I can only imagine that as a health professional, if you started to play forward worst case scenarios in your head, it really could be quite frightening.
Yeah, I think there was initially there was a sort of sense of disbelief about it, because in general practice we've had pandemic preparation for many years, and we've gone through sort of near misses, that you might call them, with swine flu and SARS, and nothing ever really eventuated. And when we saw this pandemic sort of really gathering momentum really quickly, I think there was just a sense of shock and disbelief that it was happening the way it was. When the pandemic was finally declared, I think there was just a sense of relief of, let's get on with it and actually do everything we need to do, because there were high levels of worry. My worry was for my patients who would really struggle with sort of other health conditions. I look after a lot of elderly people. I do a lot of home care for people in palliative care and in cancer care, and you really worry for them and how it affects their lives. And that's been one of the hard things about the pandemic. Even though we've done really well, the consequences of isolation have been really taxing on a lot of people. So it's definitely not been what we expected. The other worries we had was for our staff in the practices. We wanted to make sure our staff were really well protected, so that they felt safe coming into work, because they love looking after people. They want to come into work, but they also need to be in a safe and comfortable position. And if they're not feeling safe, then the other side was, do patients feel safe coming into a waiting room full of other people? And we've gone to a lot of effort to really make sure that the message is, if you come into general practice, you're going to be okay. We've gone to a lot of effort to make sure the environment's safe for people.
Yeah, and so you've just touched on a few of the different types of patients that you work with. Have you noticed any changes in the reasons why patients are presenting to you, for example, mental health reasons, or people coming to the GP more often, or being more anxious than normal about flu-like symptoms, that kind of thing?
Yeah, look, all of the above, Glenn. I think there's it's a nice summary. I mean, I think if you look at the effect of the pandemic, we've all got a higher sense of worry no matter what, because I think every single one of us has lost a sense of control, being in control. When we were never in control, but we sort of had a feeling of certainty. And now if we think about, if I was to ask you, Glenn, well, what are you going to be doing for Christmas this year? You probably don't really know properly, and none of us do. And that, I think that sort of sense of we don't really know what's going to happen next sort of heightens everyone's level of worry. So if you're normally emotionally well, that might just tip you over to a little bit more worry. But if you were struggling emotionally before COVID, it's often sort of pushed people to their limits, and they've suddenly become really obviously anxious or sad or struggling. And that's the effect that we're seeing. So emotional well-being's not so good. There's lots more problems with alcohol and addiction. There's less active people out there, which is not good. And there's worry around, should I be going to the doctor? We're sending this message that if you're feeling sick with a cold or flu, you should be assessed and, if possible, tested at the moment, because we're trying to actually survey the community to see the presence of infections. And, there's a lot of, I guess, confusing messages out there.
Yeah. And I guess all of that said, and I know this requires a very generalised response given that this Q&A is going out to parkrunners across 22 countries, but we're all in very different stages of restriction. But as a GP, can you give any very general health advice or takeaways to the wider parkrun community about navigating these really challenging times?
Yeah, look, I think the simple thing is to sort of acknowledge that this is a difficult time, not just for yourself, but for everyone out there. So all of our emotional well-being and the levels of stress have tended to be sort of in more sort of challenging states. And I always sort of think about emotional well-being in terms of, well, what can you do for yourself to manage your own emotional well-being? And when people come to the doctor, I think they predominantly think about coming to the doctor for things like getting a referral or medication or doing, what can the doctor do to help you? But, the thing I try and work with people is, well, what are the things that are within your power to sort of manage your own emotional well-being? And for me, look, exercise is a big part of my life, so exercise is a big thing. But for other people, that can be things like, listening to music really intensively and intentively, or attentively, I should say, or just going for a walk, spending time with friends and stuff like that. So, but thinking about what helps you sort of quieten down your thinking so you're not so sort of stressed and worried by things. It's a really important exercise. And I always sort of say to people, before you go to bed every night, you should be able to sort of think about, well, what are the things, the emotional well-being things that I've done for myself? What's one thing I've done to manage my own emotional well-being today? And to be able to answer that's a really useful exercise.
Mm. And I guess on the flip side of all of this, one of the messages I've noticed being reinforced by several of the chief medical officers in some of the states and territories here in Australia is that they're obviously really quite concerned that people aren't presenting to GPs or hospitals with non-COVID related symptoms and illnesses, because of course those people are worried they'll be adding extra pressure to medical staff and resources, but the CMOs are warning that this could lead to people becoming very ill, and in some cases it could be fatal where people have delayed seeking medical treatment. From your experiences so far, is this reticence to see a GP something that you've noticed, or do you think Western Australia's, I think it's fair to say, incredibly successful response to managing COVID so far has mitigated those types of situations?
Certainly, look, I would agree with the messages that are out there, which is you shouldn't ignore feeling unwell. You shouldn't ignore particularly other health issues, because that's a lot of what we've seen in general practice is just health issues that have been put on pause because people don't want to come to the doctor. And that's a real problem. But particularly with respiratory illness, I think it's probably something that we can all do for our own community is go and get things checked out and consider getting tested if you do have symptoms of respiratory illness, because even though you might be pretty sure you perhaps don't have COVID, and no one's totally sure, but you might be fairly sure just based on the fact that, say, your community hasn't had any positive tests in a very long time. Just that information gathering exercise is really helpful, not just for yourself, but also for your medical care providers and also your general community. So, that's probably a really important message, Glenn.
Yeah. Now, just moving on a little bit, Tim, I mentioned at the beginning of the call that you're the former chair of the Australian College of GPs board. But can you give a bit more detail about what the RACGP is, your background with the college, and also your current involvement?
Yeah, so the RACGP is a academic organisation for general practitioners. It's involved in assessing GPs as they become GPs and providing education for them throughout the process. To be honest, my involvement's probably pretty boring, and it's probably not worthwhile talking to a large extent. But I sort of took on a sort of administrative leadership position, which was a wonderful journey. I'm very grateful that I did do, but became really consuming in my life, and that was 4 years of time. That was a great thing to do. But I'm now on the other side. I've gone back to my passion of teaching in general practice, which is why I started a podcast and just face-to-face teaching. So that's my main sort of thing that's come from it. Along the way, I'm sort of involved in organising conferences for the College of GPs and doing teaching and face-to-face teaching and sort of electronic teaching as well. So that's my story with the College of GPs. Probably as I sort of, it was such a big role, but as I left, I thought about, well, what do I want to do to fill up my life, post that time? And actually, came back to general practice, which, I never really left, but you've got more time for my patients. And the thing I've really wanted to do is actually start my own parkrun in my local neighbourhood. And that's my next sort of big project that was going to happen up until COVID starting, basically. We had applications in and, we were looking forward to going through the journey of being a practice that actually supports and helps found and organise a parkrun.
So just building on that, when you and I first met in Perth I think it was March of last year in 2019, Parkrun Australia had been invited to speak to the college about the highly successful Parkrun Practices Initiative in the UK, which essentially fosters a relationship between GP practices and their local parkrun and supports GPs to signpost patients to parkrun, either as an alternative to more traditional medication or to complement existing treatments. Back in early 2019, when that all took place, what knowledge, if any, did you have about the Parkrun Practice Initiative?
Yeah, we were definitely aware of it because it is an amazing and a wonderful initiative, and I think it's inspired thinking to get general practice involved in prescribing, and also like genuinely being part of parkrun. I think you look at some of these practices and they are sort of intimately involved in, as I said, the founding of parkruns and the administration of it, and there's sort of the spiritual body of the parkrun volunteers are often just straight from the practice, and that's really empowering because it really aligns this concept of health and preventative health with participation, and what really I like about it is that it that particularly doesn't talk about it doing it as a specific fitness exercise. It's actually just about a commitment to doing something in your community. And I actually really believe that the true benefit of things like parkrun is the community asset they provide, and that sort of social benefit, regardless of what time you do, whether you walk, whether you run, whether you volunteer, whether you spectate, that's the real value of it. And I think that the health benefit is massive and will never be fully estimated in terms of the good it does in the community. And that's why I want to be involved with parkrun.
And when you interviewed me for the Good GP podcast about this time last year, I shared with you my observations, having lived in North America and the UK for 16 odd years and then moving back home to Australia, is that social prescribing, in my view, is very much in its infancy in Australia, compared to places such as the UK, Ireland, Canada, New Zealand, etc. Which means, on one hand, Australia has a lot of catching up to do, but on the flip side, movements such as parkrun are really well positioned, I think, to not just be a nationwide social prescription opportunity, but to really start to raise awareness of the concept of social prescribing amongst the general public and communities. So all of that said, could you offer a personal or professional opinion on where you'd like to see social prescribing get to as a concept in Australia?
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to see is I'd like to see it happening in every general practice and other settings, hospitals and other sort of health settings, but also, things like schools and community organisations. I think that's the term I perhaps don't like about social prescribing is the prescribing part, because it sort of implies that it's limited to doctors or GPs or other people. It certainly shouldn't be. I mean, prescribing is something that every person in this audience can be doing. Because I think the thing that I've learned that works about social prescribing is it works much better when people trust you. And I guess that's where general practice is really well placed for social prescribing, because we, generally speaking, GPs have got longer relationships with their patients than perhaps any other health provider. And they know that your GP is not going to recommend anything unless, it's a trustworthy recommendation. I think that's why social prescribing is important in general practice, but I think we should all be thinking about it. I think, whenever you sort of talk to people about parkrun, I sort of encourage people just to sort of talk about the benefit in terms of like the emotional benefit we talked about, and the enjoyment of participation, the enjoyment of having random conversations with people at 3.4 kilometres in, when you're starting to sort of feel a bit sort of tight in the legs. And, I think they're the golden moments in parkrun, aren't they? Where, you sort of see someone struggling and you say, oh, well done. And, that's where the value is, because there's this connection there that's valuable.
Yeah, well, I think that that broader message across health professionals is a really important one, because, last year we interviewed or surveyed 3,000 odd Australian-based health professionals to understand more about their attitudes to social prescribing. So, if they're doing it, what's working, what's not, would they consider doing it if they were helped to do so by organisations such as Parkrun? And, we were really blown away, not just by the sheer volume of responses, but also that 70% said they had experience of referring patients to Parkrun, and more than 90% said they'd be really keen to refer or signpost patients to community activities such as Parkrun if they were supported to do so. And that was, a real light bulb moment for us. And we said, yeah, there's a concept here which we think is going to be really enthusiastically adopted right across the profession. So I was just wondering, I guess on that note, can you talk a little bit about any experience you've had of signposting or referring patients to Parkrun or any other non-medicinal options, I guess, in the past, and how it's gone, and what the challenges and successes have been?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because it's funny. When we chatted earlier, you said something that was really, and so not when I say earlier, not today, but in our previous conversations, you said something to me that was really important realisation for me in social prescribing, which is you've got to explain to people it's not about the running. And the name parkrun almost hinders people a little bit as you sort of recommend it. So when I recommend parkrun, I usually say, well, have you ever thought about parkrun? First thing I want to say is it's not about the running. It's about the being there, the participation, and the sense of doing something valuable, not just for yourself, but for your community. So I think that's the really important sort of thing that I would say as someone who's prescribed it. If you detach it from running as a sort of major recommendation, then that's really helpful. A lot of the people that I recommend it to now actually are struggling in their emotional health, and we talk about how do you have a focus outside of yourself. Because I think when people sort of struggle in their own emotional well-being, they often become very sort of internalised in their thoughts and thinking, and giving people a focus outside themselves is really, really helpful. And I think that's where that's where volunteering is wonderful. So the volunteering actually makes you realise doing something for other people actually probably makes you feel better about yourself than doing something for yourself. And that's the real one of the true sort of unrecognised benefits of it. And it sort of reinforces that sort of message that like doing a positive thing on a regular basis is a really good thing. The thing I really like about recommending parkrun to people is if you ever try recommending volunteering to people, they worry about the commitment that's involved, and particularly the amount of they usually say, I don't have time to volunteer. I'd like to, but it's just maybe something that I'll do that when I'm older or I retire. And the wonderful thing about parkrun is it's sort of a low time donation. Basically, it's an hour on a Saturday when we know people aren't, most people aren't working on a Saturday, so there's actually very low, few excuses for not being involved in parkrun, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, wise words. Tim, it's been fascinating speaking with you as always, and hearing your experiences and insights. And I know I speak for all of us when I say that I really can't wait for parkrun to be back up and running. And I also can't wait to get over to Western Australia again to parkrun with you, perhaps as a new parkrun event director. Who knows? So thanks very much for your time. In the meantime, of course, everybody can continue to follow Parkrun's social media channels over the coming weeks as we wait for Parkrun to return. And we can look forward to bringing you another Parkrun Q&A in the very near future. So Dr. Tim Coe, thanks for being our special guest and for your continued support of Parkrun. Thanks to everybody at home for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Glenn.